Okay. Welcome everybody. I know it's the beach is calling, so I feel your pain. My name is Steve Peters. I run a little seed company, one-man band called Seed Revolution now, focused on breeding tomato varieties. So anytime you want to corral me during the rest of the conference, I'd be happy to share it with you. I might talk your head off, so beware. Okay, farm-based seed companies growing relationships. A very EcoFarm title, I must say. And I was looking, our category is growing, and that sort of is amusing because I'm thinking of growing. We are growing plants, we're growing seed, but we're really growing human beings. You know, and that I think ultimately that's kind of what we're faced here with, given the fact that we've got some issues, some major issues with agriculture today, and you know, is the seed industry fulfilling what we need? And I respectfully say no. And so, hence, we have three really great speakers here today. I'm really happy, I'm thrilled to have them all here. We have Don Tipping from Siskiyou Seeds in Williams, Oregon. We have Quinn Shaka from, well, it used to be called All Good Things Organic, but that's the legacy name. Now it's the Good Plant Seed Company.
It works.
Plant Good Seed. I knew I'd screw it up, but anyway. And Kristyn Leech from Second Generation Seed. So, they're all representing farm-based seed companies, and they'll go into what that actually means and why is that important. Why do we even call it a farm-based seed company? And they'll be talking about how they connect with not only other farmers and other seed companies, but also the general public. You know, how does that exchange happen, and what they can derive in terms of the needs of those other constituencies. And so one of my really burning questions here is how do we as farm-based seed companies maintain real quality breeding and true varietal maintenance? You know, because seed growing is a serious endeavor, and it's you know, it's not something to be taken lightly, and you know, you need very competent people to pull it off. And then of course the other question, how can we achieve financial stability? There's the rub. And there might be a few ideas that our panelists would throw out here, but anyway, thank you all for being here, and we're going to have roughly an hour, maybe 50 minutes to an hour of speaking, and then we'll have about a half-hour Q&A at the end. If there's a burning question beforehand, let the speaker finish their talk, and unless there's something that you really don't understand, and wave your hand vigorously. But anyway, thank you all, and I think we're going to start here with Don.
Cool. I wanted to get a show of hands in the audience just so we know who we're talking to. Who here is a farmer? Awesome. Dang. Okay. Who here would like to do like contract seed growing for other seed companies? All right. Anyone here want to start your own seed company? Maybe we'll do it. People. And who here is just passionate about like seed as one of the cornerstones of human civilization? Right answer. So that's, in my understanding, the way I see it, human civilization is built, if we use the metaphor of a table, the four legs of the table are soil, sun, water, and seed. And humans only really, mostly we're just blessed by the creator of all this stuff with the first three. But seed, humans have a role in, and I'm going to add like an honorable mention and really important, like fifth leg or indigenous peoples that understood like seed. They didn't have to plant it, but they were out there harvesting acorns or tarweed or that kind of thing. And those original, peoples that were here that way. My name's Don Tipping, and Steve and I have been seed brothers since '97, so it's cool to be back here. I think my first EcoFarm was in '93, so there's a deep well of inspiration that exists here that really is you all, that we bring our collective hope for the future. And I think seeds really embody that. And if you work with seed, just kind of in the shadow of this crazy political reality we're in, seed's pretty cool because no one can say like seeds are bad. Like if you're doing seeds, you're pretty much on the winning team as long as you're not doing like utility patents and all that kind of stuff. I wanted to put up here is a dear friend and mentor of many of ours, John Navazio. Dr. John Navazio just passed away this past June, and of pancreatic cancer. And he was really the first plant breeder. He was like an organic hippie farmer that then went and got a PhD in plant breeding at UW, and then brought that knowledge back to our organic community sometime in the late 90s. I think Steve and I were both there at that.
Actually, he worked for Alf Christensen Seed. Actually, first was that seed company in southern Montana, southwest Montana.
On a high altitude, which later became Garden City Seed.
Garden City Seed.
Yeah.
He started there and then went to Alf Christensen in Vernon, Washington.
So John taught us a lot about carrot breeding, a lot of Nebraska spinach, and why I wanted to bring this up was not only to honor our dear friend who's passed, and that as we get older we go to way more memorials than baby showers and weddings and stuff, but that cherish your mentors and the people that are important portals into knowledge and wisdom while they're still here. So there's our friend Frank Morton, who really co-invented salad mix back in 1981 with Mark Music, and sold, check this out, 1981, salad mix, $25 a pound, included no lettuce, and they would next day air it to Boston, New York City, being in that permaculture mind of like curiosity about agrobiodiversity, of like what would it be like if we put basil tips and borage flowers and things that are passé now. So, cherish these people while they're still around. Frank's still with us, so each of us have these people in our life, and, honor their wisdom. And as a father of two sons that are 18 and 22, I sincerely wish I could take wisdom and just put it in them, but it doesn't work that way. It's time depth, and that very much articulates how seed works. So for me, that starts with understanding my bioregion. So I live in the Cascadia bioregion. This point right down here is called Cape Mendocino, and that's where the San Andreas Fault runs into the ocean. And we've all heard about like the big Cascadia Fault that's gonna snap at some point in our lifetimes conceivably and be a magnitude 9. That starts here. So that's basically the dividing line up into the southern Alaskan region. And this is the land of salmon, coniferous forests, rivers. There's a certain archetype, deer, bear. So understand your climatic thing, because seeds imprint on climate analogs. This morning, Gary Nabam was talking about climate analogs. And the cool thing about seed, I was never like a botanist and wanting to know the Latin names of all the plants around me. But once I started doing seed, then I was like, oh, what is that? What is that? And then memorizing and understanding plant families and this whole idea of kinship gardening. And I have a picture of Dr. Ellen Capular on there, and understanding the like phylogenetic tree of life, like how are these related? Like how many people here know that tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, petunias all have trace amounts of nicotine in them because they're related to tobacco? Once you begin in Datura and Brugmansia in the ayahuasca realm, is because they're alkaloids that they're assessing, because they all have these common ancestors. And that's where, once you understand your bioregion, and like this is the Smith River that's like an hour drive from my farm, so we've got that wet Cascadia kind of thing. And then over here, this is a Darlingtonian pitcher plant bog near my farm of these weird insectivorous plants in this kind of like pine oak chaparral that's very California. So you got to understand where you're starting. This is my watershed that flows down into my farm from all these springs. I'm down here. And so what is the context of where you are and what you're doing? And one of the things I've learned as we talk about bioregionally adapted seed, it's not so much like radius from your farm or your location, but more the climate analog, but also latitude. Because what do plants need to grow? Sun, soil, water, and the sun. So we're like, where my farm is 42.2 degrees north latitude is the same latitude as Monaco as Nice, France, as Istanbul, Turkey. You know, like, whoa, really? You know, I think of those areas as warmer, and just draw those lines, or flip to the southern hemisphere, New Zealand, Chile. So all of a sudden you get a sense of like what plants work in those areas. And that's, you know, in permaculture we say design patterns to detail. So that's why I'm trying to give you a sense of that. You know, zooming in a little closer, this is my farm. We cultivate about 12 acres of annuals. We have a few hundred fruit trees and some pasture for sheep. We have 9 ponds. If you want to geek out about that, over here at the Seed Swap, we can talk water harvesting. You know, and this is just last week at the farm. You know, we're in that kind of like Mediterranean Cascadia ecosystem. And I want to bring up, as we're talking about agrobiodiversity, anyone know who this is? You're not allowed. Anyone else? We should all know this name as we do Rachel Carson, a Darwin, a Jane Goodall, people of this level. This is Nikolai Vavilov. He developed the largest seed bank on the planet with 180,000 varieties by 1920. And he traveled around the world discovering the centers of what he called the centers of origin of our agricultural crops. And so, you know, that's a whole other lecture if you want to know about this. I have a podcast and all that. Gary Nabhan has a whole book where he retraced his steps called Where Our Food Grows. But he was trying to avert starvation, and sadly he died in a gulag prison for being an intellectual elite because Lysenko and Stalin went after him. So, you know, this has never been more important than now with climate change and all this kind of stuff, and we need this kind of awareness of reading the book of nature to be more widespread. And when we started, we didn't start it,
What is his last name again?
Vavilov.
Thank you.
Vavilov.
Vavilov is the correct pronunciation.
Okay.
Yes. John.
I know, my Russian's a little.
Yeah.
Check this out. These are seeds stored in the U.S. Capitol. And starting in 1862 with the Land-Grant College Act, so basically we're actually running 1855 to 1924 by the U.S. government using the Postal Service would use the land-grant colleges like UC Davis, Oregon State University, to trial and figure out what are the best varieties, pack them up, and mail them out to free. 13 million packets of seed a year for free. Not just random seeds, but the best that they could figure out, because they knew if farmers were strong and had the best open pollinated genetics that they could save their own seed. And what do you think happened to this? You know, we had World War I and the industrialization of agriculture we turned World War I onto the earth and agriculture, and we lost that in the privatization, and it just keeps getting worse and worse. And worse. Yeah, so now, you know, and this work continues. This was in the spring. I was lucky enough to go to Kenya with the Open Source Seed Initiative, of which I'm a board member of, and help develop rural seed banks there, because in Kenya and much of Eastern Africa, it's illegal to save and sell seeds. And the police actually come to farmers markets where people are doing this. So it's mostly women-led, because women in Kenya are not allowed to own property. That's wild. So, but if they can grow a little bit more vegetable diversity, they can make a little bit of money and be able to care for their children there. So seed, and this was like a huge aha moment for me. Seed security leads to women's rights, leads to human rights. And that's something I think, you know, as we look here in this context of the culture where we're at, and back to Vavilov real quick, I think there's an interesting note. During the siege of Leningrad, Hitler was planning on delivering his victory speech from the balcony of the Vavilov Institute in 1945. They lost that siege, and the workers of the Vavilov Institute barricaded themselves inside with sacks of grains, potatoes, the biggest seed bank in the planet, and they all starved to death. And so this is an interesting idea. We've really, the government or universities and a lot of organizations have really left, you know, taking care of seed just over there in the weeds. You know, or Will Bonsall in that movie, See the Untold Story, is like, some things are just too important to let other people do. And I think seed saving is one of them. So this is up at a village up at like 10,000 feet in Kenya, and we're doing variety trials of potatoes and figuring out like what are the best varieties of potatoes and other crops. Fascinating whole reality, so much ecological wisdom and tribal languages, and I'm trying not to disappear down a rabbit hole there. But, you know, again, this is an interesting lesson of like that adaptation thing. So Kenya, the equator goes right through it. So the crops that are adapted there are not good for Oregon. You know, but there are things to learn about the overarching pattern. So, you know, that saying like, you know, take only photographs, leave only footsteps, you know, I think as we tread lightly in terms of like cultural appropriation and all that kind of stuff. How do we interact with this and be in reciprocal relationships with seed? You know, because it really teaches you that. You have to care for it, really care for you. So, but with that said, here, you know, maybe I'm putting my foot in my mouth. I didn't really understand the importance of millet and sorghum until then, but millet is the 5th most planted crop on the planet. And sorghum, I think, is like 6, but nobody eats it. And, you know, so I just wanted to learn about it. So we did a trial of like 20 different kinds of millets, which were 7 different species. And just to learn. But who like buys millet and grows it? Flower growers, mostly, to put in like bouquets. But, you know, because I'm aware like that the universities and the government are not doing this like agrobiodiversity curation, having a seed company. So I didn't even mention that. We have Siskiyou Seeds, I think we're in year 16. We have about 10 employees and we do seed racks and have about 700 varieties of all organic, open pollinated vegetables, flowers, herbs, and small grains, and some dye plants and stuff. So, you know, I just want to learn about this stuff because all of a sudden you can't go to the, you know, your extension agent because they don't know. All they know is the hybrids. They just know how to regurgitate what like industrial ag is. So, you know, how can we become that grassroots silent awakening that seeds are? And as Steve talked about seed quality, I'll just run through the millet. They're so cool. These are foxtail millets. This is the sorghum, 1/4 pound of grain per plant. You know, so you want to feed your chickens or something. There it is. These here, the 20-inch long Indian pearl millet, smells like maple syrup when you harvest it. The seed heads of that. There's so many different kinds. More of the foxtail, that's dragon claw or finger millet. That's actually the most commonly grown one for bird seed in the U.S. And well, I'll just leave this slide up here. But you know, if you have seeds in one hand, like let's say you have like organic, blessed by, you know, the Dalai Lama seeds in one hand, and you have like total GMO, you can't really tell the difference. You know, if they're both a brassica. That's an interesting thing with seed quality. So there's as our friend Lane Selman, and if you're not familiar with the Culinary Breeders Network, I encourage you to become familiar with her work through Oregon State University. She coined a phrase, putting a face on the seed. And just like at the farmer's market, you got, you know, Steve Sprinkle. You know, I go get my veggies from Steve Sprinkle. And how do we, and that's where the small farm-based seed company comes in, because not only are we producing the seed and learning to translate the wisdom of the earth and the indigenous people that gave us all these things, or that we took from them in a lot of instances, but then we're bringing it forward with the culinary traditions. How do you grow it? What's the story? What are the different names? And we are providing that service to translate that with our integrity. Like, you have to have integrity because it's a trust thing. You know, like what's the Ralph Waldo Emerson saying? I have great faith in a seed. If you tell me a seed is planted there, I'm prepared to expect miracles. And that's, to me, always still blows me. I got to explain what this is. It looks like a color. Throughout the Kenyan highlands and Eastern Africa, they grow this species of black nightshade that they eat the leaves of, and they have to parboil it. But when I was processing seed, I was like, that is the most vivid purple I've seen from a plant. So, you know, like constantly learning, and I wanted just another nod to a, you know, fallen elder. Why did that do? There we go. There's mushroom like glitching us from across the void. This is Dr. Alan Capular, who's really one of the godfathers of this whole open pollinated heirloom seed movement. You know, molecular biologist by training, and, you know, started Peace Seeds, then later was part of Seed to Change. But used that curiosity about nature to do crazy things like this. And this is where it gets fun, because then you can do stuff like this, and actually it becomes like a breeding project. So this was part of a variety trial we did of 30 different summer squashes. Every kind I could come with. We let them all cross-pollinated. They were the only cucurbita pepo in the field. You know, which is like crazy, but mushroom, he was into this idea of grex, which is Latin for herd or flock. And you get a bunch of genetics. Like, let's say you don't have traditional seeds, because up where I'm at in the Pacific Northwest, there was no agriculture before, you know, colonizers showed up. It was all hunter-gatherer, tended with fire. You know, it's arguable if that was farming. But anyhow, so we let these all cross, and then each one of these, so like this, we know what the mom is this white patty pan, but any of these ones could have been the dad. So then I have all these, seed packets, all these future, like why don't we have dark green crooknecks or white crooknecks or striped? Like any of it is possible. And that's what, when you get into seed saving, it's like, you remember when you were a kid in the backseat of your car and the parents decided what the music was? When you're a farmer, you get to move into the navigator seat. You kind of like get to decide when you're doing seed, you're in the driver's seat. You get to decide what the music is and where you take the ride of our relationship with plant genetics. So like here's another project. Why don't we have a brown sweet corn? I was noticing some of these kernels, which means that the father, the pollen was sweet corn. So here's a breeding project. It's going to take me like 10 years, but our friend Jonathan Spiro has an orange sweet corn that after he passed away, I'm working on. So you get to really get in there, and then, you know, people are totally fine. Like that compost creature, literally I say, expect everything. And people are into it, you know, or not, don't buy it. So, you know, just I'll kind of fly through more of these. But who knows when it'll be the next honey nut squash. You know, that's the product of a chance interspecific cross between Cucurbita machata, like a butternut, and Cucurbita maxima. Yeah. And it has extra sweet genes. So and we get to do a lot of diversity on our farm. We do about 3 acres of seed, and we also work with a network of growers. But we're talking about like what's the appropriate scale, and I just wanted to kind of share a few facts. I thought this was really cool. Farms 3 acres or less, 81% of the seeds they plant is organic. That's according to the 2021 State of the Organic Seed Assessment. 160 acres or more, it drops down to 19% of the seed they plant is organic. So we're not going to try and compete with Johnny's, you know, as a small scale, but those small scale farms that they're all about the beauty, the individuality, showing up with something unique at the farmer's market, that's our niche. And to me, I love it because it's garden agriculture. Like here's one of like 10 or 12 quarter acre plots we have. It just looks like chaos. And I love that. And, you know, and then more breeding projects, I'm just kind of roll. And then we do a seed school on the farm every year or twice a year. So we let students help us with these breeding projects and learn firsthand from the plants how to do this. And through that, cool things come out. This is a Tlaclula pink. It's an indigenous tomato to the Mexican highlands, all ruffled. Are you all hip to the Italian or Spanish storage tomatoes that you hang in clusters? Has that made it down here yet? Mm-hmm. This is Decolgar bombetta, and the people store them. They'll last till like February, March, unrefrigerated in your kitchen. Getting away from all the refrigeration. Here's a Starburst sweet corn that I've been working on breeding. That again, one of my mentors, Bill Tracy, says, "Oh, it won't work. Stop." I'm like, well, it's working for me. I don't care. You know, and same with bean breeding. Like beans will cross if you force pollinate it, and just let the journey of agrobiodiversity. Capsicum bacatum, these are from Nepal. There's Tlaclula gold. There's so much out there. Here's corn selection of a open pollinated line with our seed school. A multicolored quinoa from Colorado. Flowers are a cool breeding opportunity. I'm zinnias, I'm gonna close on zinnias because epic, like what's possible. There's so many, and these, we can get into it, but zinnias have a high degree of polyploidy and jumping genes, transposons, so as does corn. So when you begin to lean on it, it's like cool. Like some plants, they're like a ballet dancer. You lean on it, it falls over. Ones with transposons, it's like capoeira, like, oh yeah, cool. So dahlia is an interesting one. 57,000 named cultivars of dahlias. So throw that at a weed grower next time they want to tell you weeds are the most diverse crop, because dahlias are an octoploid. So conversation for later. This is the product of my friend Mushroom and Linda's daughter. It's but I keep on working with it, and I cross their Dreamin' mix with a cactus mix zinnia, so that'll be a future variety. And it's just as fun, and this is how we do it, just with like little jewelry bags, and we're just out there just kind of like traipsing through the garden being like, wouldn't that be cool? This was a bet with Frank Morton to stabilize that. But here, and there's jumping genes in action, like red flower, this, and that crossed one, all on the same plant. Yeah. Genetics is fluid, and that's one thing Navazio taught us. We'll kind of close with that. Genes flow. Nature doesn't want to be put in a box. So as we work with things, they'll always find a back door around whatever control mechanisms. Because a lot of industrialized agriculture is about control for proprietary, capitalist profit. And on that note, I will say our farm gross sales have sextupled since starting a seed company. So economics we can talk about later. Other zinnia lines that I'll be releasing in years to come. And I wanted to close with this last idea, kind of back to the Vavilov idea of we don't really have like the Svalbard, which is an ex situ seed bank. We have these germplasm repositories, but they're basically the lackey of industrialized ag. They're not really for the people. And this was, I'm sorry I used ChatGPT, I'm gonna have an artist friend like render this, and I'm starting this thing called the Cascadia Seed Bank to build built into the mountainside fireproof seed bank, and then an associated agrobiodiversity research center as a nonprofit for the public good. Is really, I'm thinking how to Robin Hood money from rich people to hire young people to keep this vision going. And so that's where I think the people like I'm in the middle, how do we use our energy, our halfway point energy to create opportunities in this just economic train wreck that is trying to make money farming, when really it's about the sacred responsibility of being in relationship with our Mother Earth and feeding one another. So I wanted to just kind of close with that. Sorry if I talked fast, but we'll talk more later. Cool.
All right.
I'm going to hold this. Yeah, let's just replace it. Does that work for you? Sure.
Hi, my name is Kristyn. I'm from Second Generation Seeds, and I also am a parent to two wonderful children. And like Don, I did want to take it a step further and try to physically inception in my children a love of the plants that are important to me and to our people. And so this is each of my kids when they're just fresh out of fresh on this earthly plane, being dunked daily in our Barilla patch, to either ingrain in them or unlock what may be a deep ancestral connection to a plant that I asked one of my the aunties in our community, why do you think Korean people love Barilla so much? And she was like, what do you mean? That's a stupid question. We were born to love each other. Stop asking questions like this, and then smack me. All of this to say, one, I love, this is two photos that depict the things that are most important to me. Helps me kind of understand doing public speaking, which is not one of my favorite things in this world. But also just to say, as we talk about lots of things, I think that this is my constant of why I do this. I don't think I can make a strong economic case right now in this moment for what we're doing or being a farm-based seed company. We sort of just rolled into these things, but at the core, it's thinking about my kids and my community, thinking about these plants that mean so much to us. And I think, kind of thinking of Don's table analogy, there's the leg of culture, and I think that to me is the leg that we're insisting needs to be built into the table. And when we talk about seeds and we talk about diversity, because Indigenous people and communities globally are who's stewarding biodiversity, not just in the past to give us, not just to preserve in these seed banks, they're giving it to us now, we're preserving it now. We want to think of that in the present, and we want to think of the future for our communities too. And so we get into the economics, it's gonna sound kind of bleak from my end, but it, for us, is just rooted in the fact that, for me on my farm, when I started out, I went through the Kitazawa catalog, and I just circled anything that said it was Korean. So like, oh, I'll get the Korean radish, and I'll get the Korean perilla, and the Korean bean. And I think then, it wasn't until I traveled to Korea and realized like there's not a singular variety, especially of a lot of these beloved crops, especially for the crops that Korea is like one of the centers of diversity, one of the origins of domesticated relationships with these plants. And so to me, I felt like at a loss of like, oh, my experience as a farmer relying on commercial seed is being curated, and I'm not consenting to who's curating that. I'm not consenting to ceding that power that has been like taken sometimes very forcibly from our different communities. And so really like, again, we sort of accidentally fell into this. We were doing field trials for Kitazawa, and that sort of really opened our eyes to where those seeds are coming from and the systems that those seeds are entrenched within, whose land and whose labor is exploited to give us the hybrid seeds that we have, that we're reliant on. And then, yeah, just wanting to say, like, our communities aren't a monolith, like these crops that we love so much. When I think about a life without perilla, I just can't imagine it. And so to me, just like the one thing I can do with my worry and grief about the way the world is try to be as pragmatic as possible. And so like, what do I tangibly have to do each and every day to ensure my kids, future generations, like will always have this, will always be able to stand in a field, smell these leaves, see the light pass through them. And to me, one of the things too is with a lot of these really culturally significant seeds, they have been stewarded in such small quantities, right? Like everyone has these romantic stories of, oh, they sewed it into their sleeves, they packed it in their shoes. In uncertain times, the one thing that people brought with them across like crazy, hazardous, violent journeys was their seeds, which is amazing and it's beautiful to pay homage to. And it also just means that genetically, that is very imperiled because of just the basics of like kind of minimum viable populations. A lot of these crops aren't necessarily ones that can deal with that level of inbreeding and kind of like small populations. Coupled with a lot of communities don't have access to land to grow things. They definitely don't have access to land at a scale that one particular group in this country has a very majority share of. And so there's just all of these challenges. And so for me, like really, I got into seed work mostly from the point of view of like trying to preserve not just commercial varieties, but preserving as much of the gene pool around those varieties to ensure whatever comes up in the precarious times we're living within, there is going to be enough robust genetics to support that. So some of these varieties, this came from the Korean Rural Development Agency, where there was a core collection of basically every type of perilla collected around the Korean Peninsula for like 70 years. So there was like 700 varieties. And researchers sequenced the genome and they distilled that whole gene pool in their gene bank down to 40 varieties that captured like nearly 100% of the like richness. So 100% of anything novel that perilla decided to do in relationship to the Korean Peninsula, the land, the water, the seasons, and people. So we tried to grow out that core collection because it was like, if we have these varieties, that means everything that perilla ever iterated to try to get our attention, everything it did to survive from season to season, we will have. We grow those varieties out. We brought them to different partners and community things. Not all of them taste the way people want it to taste, right? But again, like, because it's sort of tied to this bigger labor of love, we can see some of the usefulness tied to that big picture. And I think to Don's point about these seed banks and how they exist and Vavilov, like, I think that the problem, it's amazing that that was able to happen, but the problem is that it's subject to so much bias and like taste, what we think is useful or delicious or beautiful is highly subjective, and that's what makes culture beautiful, and that's what makes genetics robust, is that no two cultures looked at something like the chili pepper, which is not native to so many of our communities' lands, and saw the same thing. right? But everyone will be very particular about which one is our chili pepper, right? And you cannot substitute, like you are not gonna substitute, Aleppo for the types of Korean gochu to make kimchi, or you do so at your own risk. And so I think it's just to say, like, when there's a narrowness of like who gets to say what traits are making it through the gate, and when our public resources and public breeding is under, just historically underfunded, and obviously moving forward it's not going to get any better. If we have to like winnow that down, it's going to be subject to the way power is distributed, which is of course like uneven and inequitable. So we were doing this core collection project, and a lot of what we're doing in second generation is both trying to develop varieties, trying to preserve varieties that are really important to different communities, and then trying to adapt them to like the particular challenges so that these crops that are like part of these different diasporas can exist well in the environments where we are, kind of act as good actors and citizens and guests on land that isn't our ancestral land. And again, like I think there's just things of just that deep knowing that lets you look at something, like perilla may not be something that ever is cared about by the USDA until they find like it becomes a superfood, or they start tracking oil content and things like that. But for us, we're just really interested in being able to like track, document it, and then create templates and ways for farmers to share that knowledge. We're building a seed bank. It is in a very non-fireproof, somewhat moldy garage. It's not as romantic as Don's picture. It's like, looks maybe a little scary. I wouldn't show you a picture. So we want to both, build that out and be able to do, we're focusing at our site on doing a lot of stock seed regeneration, doing selection, taking these small populations that people have cared for so intimately, and then doing a service to the seed by saying, let's grow as big a population, let's scale this along as rapid a timeline as we can, and employ different traditional breeding techniques to really rapidly try to reinvigorate or kind of bring back and see more variability and make selections, right? Like Steve actually is the one that taught me, breeding for these different things, if you're not killing 50% of them, you did nothing. You did nothing. Which as a production farmer, you think this is crazy, but really it's like you want to see things go a little sideways, and you want to be able to know where you're going and chart that roadmap. You want to be in the driver's seat making those selections. We want those selections to happen in as democratized way as possible. Because I think for me, I'm a Korean adoptee. I felt maybe a woo-woo connection to some of these plants, but I didn't feel like just by birthright I had a say into saying where this plant moves through into the future. And I didn't want in my efforts to adapt it to kind of our heat and drought tolerance to lose that legibility. To me, it would be what a disservice if I start showing up and people are like, what is this? Oh, it's similar to kidnip, but it's not that. So we try to create templates that lets us share through different regions, both developing culturally specific phenotyping protocols, getting agronomic information from farmers about flowering times, different things that are just hallmarks of what you would select for in the field, and how it behaves in different contexts, and then also having ways to distribute it so that the culinary feedback, and again, that cultural legibility is being shared and reflected back to us by community partners. So we distribute food through different senior centers. We work with the Korean seniors in the East Bay and in LA, places where there's really those knowledge keepers and those kind of intergenerational really treasure troves of wisdom. And we also just try, we distribute wholesale through Korean groceries, and we try to create ways that it's linked back. So everything, you buy a clamshell of an herb, oh, what's this little description, what's this QR code? And then it's we're just trying to lure you and invite you in, being a part of that, and saying you as a consumer also are part of this breeding, you're part of the selection, that wisdom is even valuable. And I think telling people who are really removed from food production that they too need to actually be accountable to these breeding projects has actually been quite meaningful to kind of revalidate just what the seed holds in terms of that wisdom, and being kind of a collective mirroring for all of us. So yeah, we're able to kind of distribute that, get feedback. We also have just ways that we try to invite community to then like work with one another. So we had our program Seed Stewards, where we had like kids interview like family members. So each box they got of our produce, there were these little prompts that they were going out and being like community interviewers. They were like the assignment each week, and we came together and had virtual potlucks to kind of like just share that back and have people just recognizing like young people being like, oh my, you know, that crabby uncle actually had like a lot to say about this. It was really amazing. Like, and to just say like, oh, you know, like we ask a lot of people, oh, who has a plant breeder in their family? And most people think I don't, you know, like I don't have that. But just being like, no, this is the oldest technology in the world. Like all of you are probably just like one generation removed from someone that did something that could be constituted as plant breeding. And then we work with different culinary partners too to try to create marketing resources. So as like the seed, we are distributing it. We commercialize different varieties that we make it easier for farmers to like have these narratives and kind of like reflect back. Like if you're not of this community, like how do you share that respectfully? How do you kind of like still present something not as like something you discovered in 2024 that actually has been grown for like many centuries by other people? So trying to help create collective, essentially marketing resources that help kind of like root all of our narratives in a true sense of love. And I think it, you know, that love becomes really infectious, I think, when you just sort of like hear from other people and you're granted access to hearing like what something has meant to other people. Ursula Le Guin, the goat. You know, I don't know how to end something like this. I'm like, Ursula, that basically sums up kind of like what we think in terms of our seed work, and thinking again, like culture, like in a lot of ways being part of these different diasporas feels like something we're like preserving, and it can feel, you know, just rightfully so due to trauma and violence, like something we're like clutching so tightly and we have a certain rigidity around. But I think, you know, a lot of our work is trying to say like, what if we built like enough trusting relationships that you could like open a little more? What if you could embrace and really embrace like the reality of somewhere in the future, like can you picture someone eating this crop, like growing this crop, like this crop being in a world that looks like you can't even imagine. And that has to kind of be an active, not static process.
Tough acts to follow here. All right, let's see. Hi, my name's Quinn, and so farm-based seed companies, is that what this is called?
Yes.
Yeah. So my seed company is actually not farm-based. It used to be, and it's going to be about 14 years old this year, and I started it in Ojai, California, on one parcel of land that was lent to me by my mentor, Steve Sprinkle, and that's where we started our seed company. It was completely vertically integrated, and it was completely on, we did everything on one farm, and no worries. But I just wanted to mention Steve and also Steve Peters because of talking about mentors. We started our seed company originally as just a produce farm because I wanted to get into farming. I don't have any formal botanical education. I just liked plants. I wanted to be in nature. And then I read this amazing interview that Steve Peters did with John Navazio in what used to be a really great Seeds of Change publication. I forget what it was called, but I read that piece and I was just lit up. Navazio had a PhD in plant breeding, and he was just talking about plants in this way that I had never heard before. And then I went to Southern Oregon and saw my first seed farms near where Dawn has his farm, and I encountered seed crops for the first time, and we had been growing vegetables for a couple of years. And I was always somebody who kind of prided myself on like wanting to know everything and like wanting to understand like a process of, about stuff. Like it's just so basic, like life, birth, you know, life, death, regeneration. And when we encountered these seed farms, me and my friends, we were looking at plants that I could not recognize because they had gone to seed. They were in the seed phase, and I think it was radish and parsnip and just all of these other things. And I thought I knew so much about plants, and then when they had gone to seed, I realized like I didn't really know that much about it. So that was kind of like the philosophical or just like the cool hook for me of like being like, oh wow, this is really profound. This is the whole cycle. You learn so much more about a plant when you're doing it for seed. So yeah, this is our, I just added this because this is our kind of like eco-region. The Ojai is about 13 miles inland from Ventura. It's like kind of over here. And yeah, this is the coastal sage scrub, chaparral oak woodlands. It's a Mediterranean growing climate. That Mediterranean climate phrase is used a lot, but this growing climate is a very specific type of Mediterranean that is like, I think only 2% of the planet has. The shorthand that I have for it is like Fisher Price, my first growing climate, because you can just like do like everything. Like it's just like you could not have possibly started if you were a novice in like a better way. Like it's just it's zone 9B. We a lot of things like people grow tomatoes and basil as annuals typically. I think Steve had tomatoes in his field until a couple of weeks ago. From the previous year. So, tomatoes, basil are actually perennial. So that gives you a sense of like the wide range of growing season that we have. So yeah, I just thought I would share kind of a little bit about how the seed company went from being one company to a handful of growers. And that is related to land insecurity. We lost our farm due to some pretty dramatic circumstances in 2017. We had been there for 8 years. And that kind of necessitated us to start working with other growers. So I think the whole bioregional seed company is important. And I will go into a bioregional project that I have worked on. But I think you can kind of you can get a sense of like the growers in the United States that we have, which is like about 10 growers. It's kind of everywhere. So the company started from one farm, completely vertically integrated, and is now kind of like 10 to 12 growers who grow for the company. And we have about 250 varieties, and most of the varieties are certified organic, but some growers are like literally growing in their backyard. So they choose not to certify because they don't want to. And I'll just kind of like give an example of our packets. I connected with an illustrator early on, so all of the artwork for our packets is original. And I just mentioned the illustrator because she's one of the seed growers too. She grows the dandelion seed in her backyard. So it's very grassroots. It's like from the scale of like a backyard to Steve's field in Ojai, which is about 12 acres. And I do a lot of California native seed production at my place. And then we do stuff like hibiscus at Steve's farm. This is one of our best crops. But yeah, I was thinking about the importance of like the topic being like farm-based seed companies and like what is really unique to a region. And Don shared a bunch of great examples of that. The crop that also this connects to economics. Like there's like a fun story of like, okay, we have been involved in plant breeding for organic systems and vegetables in that 3-acre context that you're talking about, which is most of our market. So one of the crops that I got really interested in working on was onions. And it kind of started because we had grown this riverside onion, which is, I will go back to my little thing. It is an heirloom that I traced back to about 1921 when I was looking into it. So Riverside onion, best strain, has run as high as 300 sacks, choice onions to the acre, $5 per pound, $50 per ounce, postpaid, H.A. Hyde Co., Watsonville. So I got interested in onions because they are, in a sense, they're not totally bioregionally specific, but they are day-length specific in the sense that you have to grow certain onions in certain latitudes in order to get them to bulb out. So this is a short to intermediate day onion, and you can kind of see this 2.5 pounds. And I got into doing this because a farmer in town was growing this seed, and he noticed that what we had stopped germinating. And I was like, all right, well, it's time to do it again. So I started, oh yeah, there's another photo of that. So I started a new crop of this Riverside onion, and I started doing selection on it. So I would take from these plants, I would look at them, and I would see what I didn't want to keep, what I wanted to cull. And so I started culling early bolters, things that were bolting, and stuff that wasn't really making a bulb or bulbing up very well, early bolting. And then that spring, I started noticing a lot of the plants dying. And that was also a really rainy spring, so there's a lot of like disease pressure. And this plant started exhibiting signs of disease, purple blotch and alternaria. And so I think I started probably with about 250 onions, and between the snails, between the rains, and between the disease, I was left with probably a little less than 100 individuals. And that was the selection that I made. And then we grew it again the next year, or no, 2 years later on Steve's farm. And I was aware because I had tested, I had had the agricultural extension agency come out and test for disease on the plants, so I knew they were there. And so I was very aware that this could happen again with this breeding project when we reproduced the seed stock that I saved. And this time we did a method called bulb to seed, where you can grow plants where you just sow the seed out, it goes to seed, and then you just save that seed. But then with a lot of the root vegetables, you can also do bulb to seed, where you can pull the bulbs, you can make a selection, and then you can replant those bulbs. And in this case, we were selecting for uniformity. So this is the small selection that we made in 2022, and it was looking great. It was totally looking great. And there it is. You cure the bulbs for a couple of months, and then you replant them. And this is that replanted stalk going to seed. And more pretty pictures, and more pretty pictures. So anyway, we got the seed crop out, and one of the first things that I was really curious to know is if it had disease resistance, because this was a 3rd generation plant breeding project that I worked on. So I tested it. I sent it to Iowa State, and it tested for negative of everything that I was trying to keep out of it. So I considered this to be a really nice success. This was an open pollinated market ready variety that was suited to our bioregion. And I was, patting myself on the back for it. But what, kind of related to what Kristyn said, the variety just didn't sell. Like, it was like, I would get home gardeners to buy it for, a packet or whatever. We produced 11 pounds of this seed, and I really wanted to get it out there because Steve had been anchoring it for his market farm, his CSA boxes, the store, and it was a great onion. But after 2 years, I ended up having, because onion has a very short germination period, so the germination just failed. It went down to, I think, like 36% when it was originally something at above 90%. So this is kind of like the gap that I was thinking a lot about in this like farm-based seed companies. Like, these are really important projects, especially like when we're talking about not wanting to be like Johnnies and things like that, or wanting to kind of cater to this smaller market of like the mid-sized grower. And I guess what my question is like what is the best way to kind of connect? I think there's just a gap where farmers need to connect with these varieties more and grow them more at a larger scale than just the home gardener. Because otherwise, like, this project is not economically viable to continue. Like, I had to write off the seed, and it's now just kind of, there's like some seed stocks sitting in, you know, our seed library, which probably looks similar to, you know, yours, just waiting for whoever will take it up. So I think that that's just the challenge that I've identified with these farm-based seed companies. Is like, yeah, we can do a lot of niche-y heirloom stuff, but when it comes to like maintaining these varieties in like a quasi-professional manner with using the basics of plant breeding, I feel like we need a market for it. And that's kind of the question. This is not like a oh, I've got the answer, but it's just more of like something that I've identified in this gap. And also it's why, like, in a lot of ways, the seed company, while it is 15 growers, is not something like, I don't tend to market the seed company as a bioregional company, because while that is important, and while the crops that I work with are regionally adapted because they're native seeds, it's just been hard to make that argument translate into economic success. So, yeah, I figure I'd just leave it on a down note.
It's a good tension. It's like cliffhanger.
Yeah.
We're all still laughing. That's
I'm trying to think if there's anything else I want. I think that's it. I mean, really, it's just, yeah, that's kind of it. I think it's a perfect way to open up discussion on failure.
But that onion is the one I still grow because it has disease resistance. And we have typically a lot of disease in the spring. And that particular onion.
I know somebody that has some seeds.
Does it, does it match up with the hybrids out there in terms of?
Easily, yeah.
Easily.
I'm sure it does, yeah.
Yep.
I think it's a
big, sturdy onion. It doesn't last as long as some onions, but it's not, it's in early spring. It's like, I guess it's a kind of a Granix.
Yeah.
It's kind of it's a short day, non-keeper. It's
Intermediate.
It's a 2 to 3 month keeper, but yeah, it holds up for us. Dries down real well, and it has been a successful commercial onion to grow. Yeah.
And also, I think I'd add that I think that there's a certain poetry to the onion that drew me to it, because and I know this is probably getting like technical, and apologies if like there's terms that people don't understand, or maybe I don't even understand myself. The onion was actually one of the first crops that were hybridized. It was like the forefront crop of the hybrid. Like, people think of corn as the crop that is like the exemplar of hybrids, but the F1 onion, I believe that it preceded it in terms of like the plant breeding. So it's like, I think that maybe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Could be.
At least from my reading of the history books. So I think that kind of almost in a way exemplifies the challenge, because there's this really, really embedded market for really nice hybridized onions, and then there's like, decentralized open pollinated plant breeding that is really, really like lacking economically. So yeah, I like the idea of the seed bank, of this nonprofit. I think that there needs to be some kind of intermediary that can help fund these kinds of projects, because I'm concerned about them disappearing. I know that seed saving of heirlooms is not going to disappear, but seed saving of really, really good open pollinated common vegetable crops, I'm concerned about disappearing, just because the economic incentive isn't there. And the way that even organic seed companies that were at the forefront of this revolution, high mowing, have basically turned all to F1 hybrids now.
So how do you ensure good quality from your the growers in other regions? I mean, do you visit those farms, or do you just have a close communication?
I think a lot of it is that the economic success of the company has been identifying niche crops that are kind of more wild in nature, you know. So like our most successful varieties, well, we have 250 varieties in our catalog. It's predominantly represented by vegetables and flowers and kind of common things, but our most economically popular varieties are actually things like white sage, like hibiscus, things that kind of don't really need the kind of plant breeding varietal improvement that, say, you know, broccoli or onion might need.
But I have something to just touch on that real quick, and then I saw your hand back there. And John Navazio would regularly say that it's entirely possible to produce as quality seed as the commercial F1 hybrids with open pollinated techniques. That's just not where we put the money.
Yeah.
And even when they create hybrids, or even GMOs, which are all hybrids, they have to use classical plant breeding and the same kind of work that Quinn was talking about, of keen observation and selection. But if you offer it up as open pollinated, anybody ever notice when you're buying seed with Johnny's or something, that when you buy the OP, they sell it by the gram or the ounce or the pound,
Yes.
and the hybrids, they sell it by the seed count, and that is to obfuscate you getting out your calculator and comparing how expensive hybrid seed is. You know, hybrid melon seed, hybrid brassica seed, like Romanesco broccoli seed's like $10,000 a pound.
Yeah.
You know, so we just left the OPs in the dust. So the OPs and the heirlooms of our parents and grandparents were way better than what we have access to now, even if they have the same name, because this work hasn't happened. And, you know, with industrial agriculture, you know, we left the fox guarding the hen house, basically. And, you know, and that's, as one of our friends and mentors way back in the day, Larry Middleton, said, most seed companies are just paper companies. They print packets and catalogs, and they're just need some floor sweepings to put in it, because most gardeners don't know the clue. Don't have a clue, they're gonna blame themselves if it didn't work out. Farmers, they'll notice. They'll be like, no, I planted carrot seed here, it's no good, and they want the refund. So it's a lot to, you know, tease apart the way the seed industry is, and I imagine maybe we'll get into it, but do you want to call it? It's one more.
Yeah.
I'm curious, why, from y'all's perspective, does it seem that why is there more of a demand or economic incentive for heirloom seeds in comparison to open pollinated seeds?
Well, heirloom seed is open pollinated.
In comparison to the pollinated or hybrid seeds?
Oh.
Yeah.
So why is there a demand for heirloom? I think it's, you know, part of it's nostalgia, and I mean, there's been a pretty good marketing campaign for, you know, the heirloom has taste going for it. You know, even though it's, you know, like you look at tomatoes in the market. If you've ever looked at tomatoes recently in supermarkets, it's pretty scary. These plastic hard things that barely resemble a tomato. And so that's, but you know, they can pump out the poundage, and you know, and a lot of people just don't care, because they're gonna, like a tomato, they're gonna put ketchup and cilantro and chili powder and everything else on it, so they won't even taste it anyway. But yeah, I think, but as Don said, I mean, it's with careful selection, we can have OPs and, you know, heirloom varieties that are better than the hybrids that are out there. But, you know, there just hasn't been the effort made. I mean, because it's expensive. I mean, just like as Quinn was saying, they put a lot of effort into that, and unfortunately the market wasn't there when they had the seed.
Well, in some ways, some of the outcomes too are murky. Like we did a melon trial, Korean melons, hybrid varieties being introduced by Kizzle, and then we had a couple landrace varieties. And something like yield, you know, that's of course like a big desirable thing to focus on for variety. And it was like, we were realizing like, oh, you have to parse out actually like yield distribution, yield window, because you could look cumulatively, but the hybrids were dumping all fruit at once, right? And probably assuming a mechanical harvester was coming through there, so you're just gonna go through and make one pass and harvest the crop. On a small scale, like for like a grower who's direct to consumer, I didn't need like 2,000 pounds of fruit. You know, I love melons, but like that was a lot. But I did want like, you know, maybe 1,500 pounds distributed over like 9 weeks, right? Like in manageable things. And I think that was something I had asked you about, like, oh, is there a correlation for land races to be? And so it's just, again, it's like the perspectives reflected of like, what are those little things that optimize your growing system? And it's little differences like that to be able to discern. Like, we end up hearing like the taglines for these varieties being, yeah, high yielding, but actually like a lot of OPs are already performing better, like for the systems that, you know, like a lot of us are growing within. Like, and then you factor in like fertilizer, things like that. And I think that's where it's kind of like, you look at the cost of the seed packet, but when you look downstream at all the things that a seed that's really like kind of stress tested for your system, like is gonna save you on, like less water, less fertilizer. $4 for a packet may not seem meaningful, but when you look at everything else in your cost of production, that is like extremely meaningful. It's like just digging into those details, and I think that that's like just what a grower has to kind of dig in and like realize like, oh, these are the things that are actually like the key pressure points and the keys to like my optimizing my system.
Yeah, so there's a different, you know, there are different endpoint, or there are different reasons. You know, the commercial business is really different than what we need as small growers. You know, like squash, for example, like now the emphasis is to create gynaecious plants. They're all female, so they just pump out massive yields in a very tight window. And then the theory is they just, you know, harvest that, then they tear it down and plant another crop. Whereas with a good OP, it's half males, half females, and the yield gets spread out over a much longer period of time, but you don't have to tear up your field again to plant another crop. It's because it sustains that yield. It's two different ways of really looking at it.
I think it's worth pointing out too that word heirloom comes from English weaving guilds, and basically it means the heir of the loom. So your children or your apprentice would inherit your loom, along with the weaving patterns, the connections to the shepherds, the spinners, the markets to sell it. So likewise, what we're doing with small regional seed companies was we're going back to a time when the term was seedsman, seedswoman, you know, or seed person, who like lived in your area and, you know, shopped at the same stores or went to the same church. You can imagine it was a community. And you all knew what were the varieties that worked well for your area. So it was building that trust. And as I liked both of your presentations, took one crop and went down like how far down the rabbit hole you can go. And I have a view of, I can do a great job of maybe 5 crops. So I choose ones that become like the identity for Siskiyou seed, zinnias, sweet corns, this kind of thing. I can do a passable job, like sufficient on like 50. You know, I'm not doing careful breeding and huge selection work. I can do total about 150 crops per seed a year. So those marginal ones would be the peppermint, you know, oregano, artichoke. Like there isn't a lot you can do there. It's already pretty resilient, and that's where going to a grower network of other people that specialize in certain things, and you become known for that. And I think that's the beauty of the heirloom instead of the like hybrid industrial model where, you know, like Tom Stern is an old friend. I love him. I love what High Mowing Seed's done. I used to be a seed grower for them. But I'm going to just like pull up the curtain at Oz for a minute. Half that seed is coming from the industrial Dutch seed company that is just blinders on. You know, so like they breed spinach for the conditions of the Salinas Valley to produce all that baby leaf spinach. They grow the seed in the Skagit Valley of Washington, and it's all Dutch companies. That is all the spinach seed you have access to. All those hybrids in the Johnny's catalog, High Mowing, is all coming from Beho, Vitalis, maybe a few other bespoke ones, and they don't depict that. There isn't, you know, transparency in sourcing, and I think that's one thing in our community. We tell you, we're like, hey, expect some variability, or this person grew this crop, or like, I'd like to get carrot seed from Oregon, but you don't want carrot seed from Oregon, because we have wild carrot everywhere, and it would be all crossed up. So I get it from our friend Dan Hobbs in Colorado, because I want to give you quality. And when you open up our website or catalog, that's what you're getting is the story. And it's back to that heir of the loom. Heirloom is this term that describes relationships.
Yeah.
I was kind of like pondering this question. I don't know if anyone from Johnny's or High Mowing is in the room, but like, what has been the relationship with these larger seed companies? Like, thinking specifically about this onion seed, it's like, would make, I mean, any of it really, okay, it makes that, if someone told me that and I was growing onions, I'd be like, okay, why wouldn't I be growing that? So I'm just like, is there a relationship with the larger companies? And then also, I think John Navazio for a while, or what I remember is he was working with some
No,
university.
he actually was Johnny's head breeder.
Okay, yeah.
And in fact, no, we don't have, I mean, I've been starting to sell tomatoes to Johnny's, OP, new varieties, but, and they do a lot of good work. It's just that there's a pressure for them to like really cater to the commercial growers. And in fact, they're small really in the business. I mean, most of the commercial vegetable growers, for example, don't even, Johnny's is, second fiddle. I mean, there's a lot of like bigger outfits that none of you have probably ever heard of.
Like,
Well, I mean,
Universal
areas.
seed.
yeah, but a lot of the there's some.
Vitalis.
Well, no,
Christensen.
there I'm thinking of like Seminis, or actually Bayer now, which is the biggest one. Bayer owns, they're the largest vegetable seed company in the world. And there used to be an independent company called Nunnums in Germany, which that's where like good growers would buy, really good onion seed from Nunnums. Now Nunnums is swallowed up by Bayer, which is a pharmaceutical company. So, and then they have distributors throughout the country, Keithley Williams in the Southwest and Rupp Seed in the North Central.
Yeah, DeKalb.
Oh, well, they're distributors, and they sell the seed of these multinationals, of which Bayer's the biggest, and there's about 4 companies that control about 80% of the market. ChemChina, I can't remember.
Dow,
the other
DuPont,
two. Yeah,
combined.
there's 4 that control about 75 or 80%. Johnny's is a tiny fleck in there, and companies like Bayo and some of the Dutch companies are larger, but they're on the relatively small scale. Cicada is another one that's got some size, but yeah, but not nearly as big as Bayer. I mean, but it's a lot of, but most of that, the general public doesn't know anything about.
Also, I just want to say also, it's like, it's not, like the majority of the catalog, of our catalog is open pollinated from farm, but we do actually carry a couple of hybrids from Cicada, because they're good. I mean, it's like, I don't think that this is like an either or. It's like we're trying to throw out all this stuff. It's like there are these varieties that are proven, that organic growers use in their context, that they, for very many good reasons, but I think it goes to back to what you were saying there, where it's like, we know that those open pollinated varieties could be as good if the effort and the financial power and the, knowledge was put into that, and like, there are varieties that have shown that.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, we have examples of that, so, yeah.
So I've worked at farms where like Vitalis has reached out and said, we want you to be part of a trial program and to speak to this stress testing and to like, how do you get more medium scale farms interested in buying an onion seed like you're talking about? Have you considered or been involved in programs where you go to farms and be like, we want to see what this seed does in your field next to what you normally plant? Because like that has been the most convincing thing for me, is when in my soil I look at these 2 varieties.
I I think absolutely. I think that's kind of what I was kind of ending it at, where I just feel like there is kind of this need for this, like, whether it's a nonprofit or whether it's like some seed ambassador person who is doing all of this work and going from place to place to like connect these varieties from companies such as mine to like those fields. But in terms of like, have I done it personally? I mean no. You know, the seed company is like, you know, I've got 2 employees, and you know, it's like, you know, it's one of those things where it's just, it's hard to do everything. So it's like, and having somebody who's not even about, like, say, you know, evangelizing my seed company, but it's just more about evangelizing the concept of these varieties across all of our seed companies. That person might exist. Like, I don't know the nonprofit sector that well, but I had thought the Organic Seed Alliance would be an ideal for that. But like, from what Dawn and all of us have been talking about before, it's like they've more just turned toward like working with universities now. Like they're you know, so it's like there's some kind of gap, and it needs to be filled. And I think ideally it would be filled by like a nonprofit sector or some kind of like philanthropy person who just wants to write checks to make this happen.
I mean,
which is my favorite kind of philanthropy.
Right on.
But what about the extension service, which, I mean, I gather that we're sort of like throwing that out the window because it's got a history with Monsanto and, you know, catering to these bigger players in the game. But, you know, there are plenty of other.
It is worth mentioning, there was this project called Novik that happened for like 4 or 5 years, and it was a partnership that stood for Northern Organic Varietal Improvement Collaborative, and it was OSU, Oregon State University, Cornell,
I think
and
University of
Wisconsin.
Wisconsin, yeah.
And so basically every year we would get together and decide like, all right, we're gonna do peppers, butternut squash, and sweet corn. And we would choose hybrids and OPs from companies like ours that were already like, oh, I've been hearing about that one. And we would have mother farms and daughter farms scattered throughout those regions of good farmers that were like known market farmers, and do carefully controlled with university oversight variety trials, and then publish the results. And all those are available. And I think a lot of growers just aren't aware of the resources. Like years ago, you were bringing up Bioregional, or, you know, there's these efforts. They have a funding stream for 4 or 5 years. They do a bunch of great work. And I remember, like, in that trial, our friend Jonathan Spiro had like open pollinated sweet corn that had sugary enhanced genetics in it with OPs, you know, with rigorous ear to row trialing and stuff, and those were every bit as good as the hybrids. Same with the Solstice broccoli that came out of a Grex that Jim Myers at OSU developed, and our friend Jonathan Spiro. It can go head to head with any of the hybrid broccolis, but they're not all equal, and we need that information, the YouTube videos, the photos, the spreadsheets to demonstrate, like, hey, because otherwise, like, I go back to that, you could have a handful of, like, you know, elite hybrid from the Dutch company broccoli seed in one hand, and just like rando grown for just cheap as possible, the Chichio broccoli in the other hand, and you can't tell the difference until you grow it. And that's just the challenge of seed, and that's why if you are a grower in this room and you want to get up to the like the Jedi level, pretty much seed is there. And I think like as you move up the upper echelon, and I mean that's why like a Navazio or these characters, they were at the Yoda level of like their knowledge of the botany, the history, all the varieties, the companies, having grown it for decades. And that's where, I remember Navazio would say that when we teach the seeds things, of like, you have to become a samurai warrior level of knowledge about the crop you want to work with. And, you know, Kristyn is that for Perilla, as far as anyone I know. You know, and so you have to love those ones, and then they become part of you, and then you'll be awesome.
And I think if more farmers that maybe aren't seed growers now, but maybe could become a seed grower of one crop, that
Yeah.
they become specialists. Instead of like 5% of the farmers growing seed, you could have 25%. You know, and suddenly there's a Jedi for every crop you've got.
Steve, you had a question over there?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Is that OP sweet corn that you mentioned available?
Yeah, I'll have some at the seed swap for free.
I'll see you today.
Xanadu, Top Hat, and Tuxano. So bicolor, a yellow, and a white. Yeah.
Yeah.
I had a question about tomatoes. Because we're going, we're getting more and more disease pressure, and so I've been leaning on F1s because of they've been getting more tolerance. And then Quinn's got a couple of seed varieties that are pretty good, that are OP. But they're not globe tomatoes, they're not big round tomatoes, these are cherry tomato types. So, in terms of breeding, is it possible to get the same kind of results of disease resistance or tolerance
You bet.
in heirloom or OP?
Absolutely, absolutely. We've got a lot of my own program, a lot of our original material that we started with was from the East Coast, from either Rutgers in New Jersey or North Carolina State or University of Florida. And a lot of that material had disease resistance built into it. Bacterial speck, spot, septoria, leaf spot, a number of other ones. And so we found out, unbeknownst to us originally, when my breeding partner, Conti Rawal, and I started crossing heirlooms with some of this material he had, we didn't know, but we'd send it back to the East Coast. Johnny's, for example, in Maine loved our stuff because it was resistant to a lot of the East Coast diseases.
Yeah.
Now we've grown it all through California too, and I have not seen, disease issues really at all with it. So, we're happy to send you guys some seed.
Okay, good.
Yep. Yeah.
The gap that you guys have identified of the NGO seed bank, wondering if you can just run with the idea for a minute and just envision what it would look like. What do you need initially for funding and support to make it happen?
You bring his checkbook?
What's Jeff Bezos' Yeah.
Melinda. I think
No. No, that's Gates.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
No, that's McKenna?
Mackenzie, yeah, she's giving all this money.
Yeah, Mackenzie.
I think a good way to,
Friendly with Mackenzie.
kind of like with the tomato discussion, you have to know what the germplasm is, the term to describe it, exists in a space. So Miles Davis once was asked, how do you learn how to play jazz? And he said, you learn how to play blues in every key. And then John Coltrane kind of followed that up of you have to learn how to play inside before you play outside. So you have to grow all these varieties, OPs, heirlooms, hybrids, evaluate 10 plants of each, and then assess it. And that's like learning the notes on the keyboard. And then you can begin to play around, what if we cross this with this? This one has great stature, fruit quality with that. So what I think this looks like is, imagine lots of 2-acre plots. That's a great farm size. You could really be intimate with it. Where you grow a 500 variety tomato trial, a 500 variety pepper trial, and do field days, invite growers and gardeners and the master gardeners to come walk the rows, tabulate it all out, and get data for that area. And then repeat the same thing in other areas because the conditions are different. And then you produce seed of the varieties that make sense for that area, and that's what's in the seed bank. And then you're a service that works with companies like ours to distribute the seed. So it's almost like the cultural preservation of seed. Seed Savers Exchange used to do this. I think they've kind of had some mission drift, but then that's one role. As Rudolf Steiner talked about it, there's threefold social order. There's socio-cultural elements, there's economic elements, and spiritual elements. And we put agriculture and economics, but it doesn't belong there. It belongs in our culture. And all of us are in some way banging our head against a wall, trying to figure out how to make farming pay. And maybe that's the wrong pursuit.
And I think what you were talking about, 500, a 2-acre trial, is actually not that costly. I mean, if you actually run the numbers on it, and what you would get out of it, could be phenomenal. So it is convincing, people that could support you financially. That would really, really help. Yeah.
In terms of